Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What's up, hunter friends? I've been a hunter for 2 years now. I was curious to know if anyone else, hunter or not, has any odd experience they would like to share. I have a couple, but this is the scariest one I have. Scary is the wrong word, creepy, odd, strange. So like I said, I've been hunting for 2 years, and I got seriously addicted within the first couple of months. My brother and I decided to buy a cabin in northern Ontario that was abandoned for quite a while. We got cheap off the owners, who were the nephews of the man who owned it. The kid told me that his uncle was quite a recluse, and quite crazy. They said he had guns and ammo stashed throughout the house, and found a journal with odd anecdotes inside. They notified everyone that the property may be cursed, go fuck yourselves. I know how it sounds, which scared off most of the people. So yada yada yada, we bought it since it was quite cheap, had power and water. So to us, this story didn't match the price. We clean the place out, throw out the guy's old junk and find a bunch of weird shit. Small whittling of demonic creatures hiding behind trees and rocks, quite nice, but creepy. My brother yells to me he found a journal, with only a few entries, one of those small personal number books. It talked about the creatures that hide in the bush. It talked about how to find them and how to see them. Being 4chan friends, we thought this shit was extremely autistic and hilarious. The man was clearly eating wild mushrooms. After we cleaned and had a night's sleep, we decided to go for some partridge hunting. The property, though nice, isn't that large. So me and my brother go separate ways and have a whistle radio to notify each other. I remember walking out maybe 40 feet from the cabin and took a seat to make some calls and watch for movement. I saw one moose, no tag, and watched it for a bit before it got startled and ran off. I remember very clearly I didn't move, so it must have smelled me. All of a sudden I hear a whistle. So either, my brother is lost, in trouble, or found something. So I get up and try to hurry over. We begin to whistle back and forth until we meet up. I instantly see that his face is pale and has beads of sweat on his forehead. I jokingly ask, "What? Did you see a Sasquatch?" He stared at me quietly, not like him at all, loud mouth. He starts to say in a broken voice that he was sitting quietly looking around, when he saw a moose. Me. Really? I did too, it ran off. Bro. Yeah, mine too. But when it ran, the first looked over to my right because I had a bad feeling, and noticed the dark figure, an odd face peeking at me from behind a tree. I fell off my tree stump and instantly called you. I'm freaked out, man. Let's get out of here. So, I'll admit, I thought it was crazy, but my brother isn't a liar. So we got back and unpack, and my brother said let's get out of here again. I argued that I didn't buy this place to sell it within a night of staying there. We argued, and settled with a couple pints. Say back, and rested the rest of the day. Nightfall came, and we were in our rooms. I got in bed and was ready to sleep. It was lightly sprinkling outside, so it was calming to hear the rain hit the tin roof. I was sleepless, yet extremely tired. I started to look around the room, it was faintly lit. All of a sudden I saw a dark shadow move across my window. I got nervous because of my brother's story, but decided I should look. I peeked through the window for a bit and saw nothing. When I walked back to my bed, I jumped and rolled into it. As I was pulling the blankets over, I peeked back at the window. I saw this face peering at me. It was demonic looking from what I could tell. I was stuck cold, and it slowly tilted its head to its left, and I nearly fainted. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my brother. We sat up in the living room until morning. Sun broke, we left.
Be me. Go to abandoned farmhouse at night for spooks. Go through the whole house and find nothing. Go into attic to check floorboards. Everything is legit. Set up a tent and get ready to spend night. Pass out around 2:30 a.m. Wake up at 3:30 and hear the sounds of moaning. In 4 just me bro, getting my rocks off. It sounded like someone was injured. Open my tent. Pitch black. The moaning stops. Close the tent and lay back down. Grip my flashlight tight, pull out a knife and realize how shitty of an idea it was. I hear people are downstairs having a dinner party. Giggling and laughing. Unzip my tent and it all stops. I get out and slowly walk to the attic window, small circular window. Super dark outside, no cars or lights. As I'm turning the attic door, small square door on the floor, slams upwards and makes a loud sound that actually shakes the zippers on my tent. I literally drop a brick. The door is shut and nothing happens. As I slowly walk over, I hear under the steps laughing and giggling again. I stop and feel a gust of wind. Under the 3rd floor, ground. 2nd, 3rd, attic. I hear full out stomp running, then hear it go downstairs, then the ground, and it randomly goes back to the 3rd and the door slams again. I see it bounce off the floor. I almost fainted. I begin to hear growls inside the attic with me. Run to the window and push the window open. Each floor has a small balcony. I pull myself out and begin to climb down, pretty much fall from balcony to balcony. As I get on the grass, I can hear all the doors inside the house banging. I run down the driveway in the pitch black wielding a knife. Left all my shit there until the next day me and my 2 buddies went and grabbed it all. So my last story happened a couple years back when I lived with my family. Just bought this really nice house, very old red brick, 2 floors, and basement. Nice land. I bought it with the intention of severing the land and building a house to move into and to sell this one. Well, that one, since I moved. Be me. Have young family. Baby daughter is born and my wife and I decide to move into a house so when she gets old enough we can have another shit. Old house. Wicked deal. Move in. 2 months go by, wife starts acting like a torpid cunt. I'm going to work, come home, fix shit, go outside and figure out what I'm going to do and she constantly shits on me for no reason. Wake up on Sat morning about 3 a.m. I hear noises and feel shuffling. I wipe the tiredness from my eyes and when I open them I see my wife at the end of my bed knelt over staring at me. I freak out turning on lights and was like WTF is wrong with you? She walks around, lays down, and sleeps. Snores really loud, which she never does. Next day, by the way this is like a month of her acting weird around the house, hear her talking to herself, laughing to herself and conspiring. I see her outside full-blown talking to herself. Call my mum to pick up my baby. Hours later mum comes, grabs my kid and leaves, and I argue with my wife and take her out to get air. We leave the house for hours, and she begins to act normal. She says she doesn't remember anything from the house and everything seems normal. Tell her to stay with my mom for a night. She agrees. That night. In the house by myself and I hear movement. I begin to hear giggling and laughing the exact same way I did in the old farmhouse. Instantly, I knew something was up. I began to hear banging all over the house. I ended explaining everything to my wife. Figured something may have followed me so I called a priest one day, a native another and a Wiccan the next to clean the house myself and my wife that we ended up selling to be sure.
I worked at a Christian camp in the Muskoka area for a number of summers. One summer, probably 2012 or 2013, shit got weird. There's a few older staff in their late 20s to early 40s that would wander the camp at night with flashlights to kind of make sure campers weren't dicking around or that animals weren't messing stuff up. From my understanding, They've never really come across anything more than just that. That summer though was weird. I remember there was a lot of weird little things that I can't really remember. The big thing that fucked all the staff was that a group of 3 staff, not jackass staff like some of them, saw a group of 6 IIRC beings in all black hoods in the woods about a 3-minute walk past the farthest north chalet. They weren't called cabins at our camp. They came back and told some of the older staff about it who doubled up on the nightly patrol. There were a few more sightings by the older staff in the evenings after that for the next couple of weeks in the forests just surrounding the camp, but never actually entering. The campers were never informed, but they made the campers go to the bathroom in the night with a staff or other campers, if they were in the older sections. Most of the younger staff, 16 or 17, weren't really told what was going on, but they were told to stay out of the woods and not to travel alone in the evenings. Something that I found strange was that all of the older staff who were in their 30s and 40s, there were only a couple of them, and also were missionaries, pastors, or had actually been to seminary, began kind of practicing the cultish, for lack of a better word, side of Christianity. Stuff like walking around the perimeter of the camp while reciting a prayer or holding prayer circles in different parts of the camp. I never saw anything too strange, but I saw how horrified and frantic everyone who did see something was.
There is a motel called the Nordic Inn up in Dorset, Ontario. My father stayed at the very end unit that looks like a cottage in the pic. He built cottages and stayed in the unit for months. I do not believe that unit is rented out, but my dad worked something out with the owner. He told stories very rarely about what he experienced in those months staying at the Nordic Inn. Pots and pans flying right at him, old books with old writing he couldn't make out the language hidden within the lodge, random cold spots. He spent most of the time there alone or with my stepmom time to time. Whatever was there started fucking with him personally, and he had to cancel some projects and relocate. Have more stories if anyone's interested and looking to go visit the place, as I have been there twice before and it was very eerie. Some other minor things that happened during his stay were things such as the TV turning on by itself, doors swinging open. He said he was always being watched even when he was taking a shit. He said while sitting on the toilet he would watch as something was pushing out of the shower curtain. He would mock it as he wiped his ass and it would let go. Now my dad is an old school guy, so hearing these kinds of stories with such detail and belief definitely caught my ear. He said he would communicate with it and it would stop messing around from time to time, but he felt as though whatever he was talking to would never let up and that he was in its domain. The cottages he built were massive and he needed an extra helper time to prepare and bring material. He was a stonemason, so he and this Ukrainian fresh of the boat stayed in the lodge. That's when the entity started to get into his head. He would have recurring dreams that involved his mother. He would be laying down in bed back in his old apartment when he first came to Canada, Lakeshore Road near the Christie factory, and he would hear his mom call out to him from the other room, "Go to sleep, my son. You've been working very hard and you deserve rest." She kept going on with comforting words and he explained it as feeling serene and nostalgic. He then started feeling something crawl up his bed and then onto his chest. That is when he started to choke and he kept hearing, "Open your eyes." He eventually did and he saw the black mass. He let out a few peeps and squeaks which woke up the other helper who fell asleep on the sofa. He called out to my dad and the black mass jumped off him and stood in the doorway. He said it looked similar to what a swarm of gnats or mosquitoes looked like, had only a simple figure and stood about 4 feet. He got about 2 seconds to look at it and it jumped on him again until the helper made his way upstairs to my dad's room. He explained the dream and what he saw to the helper and he was shocked because the helper was having the same exact dream but said that he woke up from it because a picture of Mother Mary fell over in his back home dream room. It happened once again 2 nights later, but it switched from my dad to the Ukrainian guy and they left the lodge middle of the night and stayed at a nearby trailer park.
He tried to inquire with the owner about what the hell was going on in that lodge, but the owner seemed sensitive to the subject, possibly not wanting to draw negative news and affect business.
This was a story my uncle would always tell me as a kid during summer vacations to entertain us children. The following was treated as the unadulterated truth by the entire family, especially my uncle, who was generally discouraged by the family from telling anyone. I can't possibly do justice to how my uncle would tell it, but here goes. B. Uncle, 12 years old, growing up in a shitty suburban town in northern Ontario. For privacy reasons, I won't say the name. Growing up there meant complete boredom for any young person involved. The most you could do was play baseball or fish in one of the local rivers. Kids who didn't start underage drinking or narcotics at a young age were drawn to the woods as a form of entertainment. The town was spread out but not heavily populated, just meant there were a bunch of empty houses and empty lots. Uncle has a best friend called T and a younger sister called S, obviously not going to use real names. These kids would fuck around constantly in Innawoods, blocking up rivers and making shitty forts that would collapse within months. Uncle had a fascination with mapping out the whole place, constantly plotting new ones whenever something new was discovered. A section of the town that was not so populated was affectionately and historically referred to as Weston. Thus began the stories of the Weston Manimal, an urban legend in the shitty suburban town that went way back. It went by other names, but my uncle's generation called it that after the TV show Manimal that was popular at the time. One neighbor owned the DVDs of the first season he ordered from the States, would have TV parties with the show. In the Weston section of the town, dogs would show up dead and trash was rummaged through on an almost weekly basis. That combined with a legend of a wild man or animal person in the town made kids go crazy with their adventuring trying to find it. Senile old people in the town would tell them stories of seeing a pale humanoid figure in the woods. Uncle and friends wouldn't always believe them, but sometimes they would take what they say to heart. Parents were advised to educate their kids on the dangers of the woods, not because of the legend of the Manimal, but because there were some genuinely dangerous bears and coyotes in the woods that could fuck a kid up. The kids played this off as protecting us from the Manimal. Imagination and fear in the kids got so bad that some teachers had to sit all the kids down and tell them the Manimal was a stupid old legend the town made up generations ago. This just made my uncle and his friend T want to prove it even more. One day a kid from their class says their dog went missing and is asking everyone if they saw it. Uncle thinks that the Weston Manimal must have gotten it. Decide to check their maps to see which places in Innawoods they haven't gone before. One big old hilly area in the middle that they generally stayed away from, about 1 kilometer wide. The only reason they hadn't gone there yet was because one of the rivers that flows around the town wraps around it and gets too wide and deep to wade across easily. The other side of the area was thick brush that no one made a path through, also couldn't get through it easily. Decide the time is now. If the Weston Manimal isn't there, then it doesn't exist. Being 12 years old and stupid, they decide to begin their expedition to find the Manimal, including sandwiches, a carton of milk, and 4 cans of Pepsi. No flashlights because of autism, but bring binoculars to search for it. T decides to include his little sister S, who was a couple years younger than them. The three begin construction on a shitty boat made of cheap wood and glue. Ended up being more of a raft that just looked like a boat, at least that was how my uncle described it. This is what they'd use to cross the river since it would take too long to cross the other way through the thick brush. They grab 2 paddles and put on their stupid red and blue ball caps to begin their epic journey. They leave just before dusk one day without telling their parents, because you could do anything as a child back then. They start walking carrying their dog shit boat raft and struggle all the way through the woods. Past their forts that saw many a night in battle. Past the old gravel pit where they'd light gasoline on fire for fun. Eventually make it to the river, probably 40 feet to cross at this section. Whip out their paddles and start paddling. All three pile into the hull. Way too much weight. The fucking boat starts leaking as soon as they paddle. Being stubborn autistic kids, they think it will make it there and back. By the time they get to the other side, the boats are completely sunk and they're all wet. Still have some daylight left and decide they'll just head back through the thick brush afterwards despite the time it would take. T tells his sister to check out the other side of the area while the two of them look up around the hills. The two march up the dry gravel hills to a miniature cliff face on the other side. They're looking down for any signs but can't make anything out. Patiently stay quiet and wait for S to come back. Eventually they hear something down the cliffside of the hill. They both look and see something moving down there near a hole in another smaller hill. Something's moving by a stream of flowing water. Uncle puts his binoculars up to his eyes. When telling the story, Uncle always chokes up at this part. Looks down at a small greenish-gray humanoid, completely naked, roughly the same size as my uncle, about 5 feet. Incredibly skinny, arms that were too long for its body. It had nasty matted black hair on its head, at least 1 foot long, wavy and scruffy, obscuring its face. It had cuts and bruises all over its dirty naked body. It almost looked emaciated. It was dragging something behind it with its incredibly long fingers and even longer overgrown nails. A cut-open golden retriever, definitely the missing dog that belonged to my uncle's classmates. It stopped for a while as T and my uncle were dead silent. Then it looked up at them. My uncle was still staring at this thing through his binoculars. With what little sunlight was left, he could make out its face. He always described it the exact same way. Its head was way too round and big for its body, almost spherical with an underdeveloped forehead. Super skinny neck with what appeared to be a giant Adam's apple. The long scruffy hair on its head was stained with blood and dirt. It rolled down its face and obscured some of it. Its eyes were bulbous, black and sticking out too far. A mouth that was way too wide to be normal, going from one side of the head to the other. Its skin on its face was darker and really tight, almost stretched. It didn't have a fucking nose. It didn't have any fucking eyebrows. It didn't have any fucking ears. My uncle has no idea how long he looked at the thing. Eventually it calmly walked off towards its hole in the ground. T was shaken and tried to get my uncle to talk. T didn't get as good of a look on the thing, but he did see its shape. Uncle was borderline unresponsive. T shoved him down the hill. They made a fuck ton of noise but needed to find S as soon as possible and fuck off back home. The sun is done going down at this point and it starts to get dark. They start running towards the other side of the area where they sent ST is starting to panic because they can't find her. Uncle starts to become more responsive as they try to look for her. They don't want to make noise in case they attract that thing. T starts shouting, calling out his sister's name. My uncle stops him from making noise. They can hear the thing from the hole start walking towards them in the brush. They know it's not S because of the noises it is making. They sprint back the way they came, around the opposite side of the area closer to the thick brush. They hide in some bushes for a bit once they're on the other side to catch their breath. S isn't calling out to them, but if she was lost in the woods she should be making noise. This makes T scared as hell for his sister. A quicker way through the brush was closer to where they saw the thing dragging the dog. They devise a plan to get home as quickly as possible and tell their parents so they can come to the woods with guns and find her. They wait a few more minutes as it gets darker and darker. The two start running for the brush but hear a noise. Both freeze, duck behind a fallen tree. The thing from before comes out into a clearing. Can't see my uncle or T, it's dragging something else. A much smaller dog, looked brown but couldn't make it out since it was almost completely dark. The little dog is bound with some sort of rope or crude vines, it's squealing and barking up a storm. The thing starts to torture the little dog, cutting it with its nails in certain spots and pinning its head down. All the while this thing bobbed its head up and down and made a raspy, laughing-like sound. Could barely make out that it was smiling. It started skinning this dog alive and tearing at its meat. Eventually the dog stops moving as the thing begins to eat it. The two slowly begin inching away, trying to make as little noise as possible. As they're walking away, my uncle looks behind them. The thing is standing straight up looking directly at them. Uncle panics and screams and starts pushing T to run. The thing begins to chase them. All my uncle can do is run. He gets split up from T after a few minutes of running. He was still in the area and didn't make it through the thick brush, only ran along the edge of the area. He can hear T screaming off in the distance with some other inhuman sounds that he couldn't place. Uncle tries to run to find S while the thing is distracted. Runs to the right where they sent S when they showed up. Not a trace. Eventually he finds her backpack, slightly ripped on one side. He gets worried. He begins to look further in the direction in the backpack. Runs past some trees. T's screaming is starting to get louder. Uncle sees something small and long underneath a branch. It's a fucking arm. It's S's fucking arm, wrenched right off of her body. Next to it was a shard of her shirt. Uncle freaks out, begins running blindly. Trees and bushes start cutting at his face and legs. He keeps tripping and stumbling in the pitch black woods. After running for what seems like hours, he finds a dirt road he recognizes. He begins sprinting alongside it in the direction of home. He hears more screaming but isn't sure if it's real or just his imagination. Running and bleeding at the same time is exhausting him. He eventually makes it to the town hall and goes the usual route from there to his house. Uncle runs into his porch at full speed and collapses while trying to open the door. Around this point there's a gap in my uncle's memory. He can't visualize any of this, but it's what his parents, my grandparents, told him. From my grandparents' perspective, he had been out playing for much longer than he should have. Once the sun went down, they called all of their neighbors to see if they knew where he was. Eventually they called the police and asked for an officer to come to their house to help find my uncle. When they were talking to the officer about what they should do, my uncle ran into the porch, then ran into the door. He was bleeding heavily from cuts on his legs and one on his arm. He was completely unresponsive and delirious, presumably from the running and adrenaline overdose. He was unresponsive and borderline comatose for the next several days. Grandparents thought he hit his head, but local doctors said it was more likely symptomatic of a traumatic experience. My uncle stayed in his bedroom until he started talking. This is when my uncle starts remembering things. T and S never came home that night. Their parents weren't the worrying type and didn't report it till the next day. My uncle was unresponsive during the search period, so no one got any information out of him on what happened to T and S by the time my uncle was back to normal. Some cops asked him what he was doing that night and what happened to T and S at the time. My uncle tried to convince himself it wasn't real. He also didn't want to get in trouble since it was his idea to look for the Weston Manimal. He kept his mouth shut. To this day he says it was the biggest mistake of his life, but he was too traumatized to tell the truth. Kids in his class began to spread rumors that the Manimal must have got T and S, that it climbed into their rooms in the middle of the night and killed them. Teachers and adults told these kids to be respectful to T and S. A few weeks later my father was born and my grandparents wanted a better life for their two sons in a bigger city. They moved shortly after and my uncle never heard from T or S's family ever again. He claimed that he's suffered from serious stress after the incident, that he keeps having flashes of guilt for what happened to his friends. My uncle still told us the story though, much to our older relatives' dismay. I think it was therapeutic for him to get out his feelings about the incident rather than just repressing all of it. He left the gory bits out when we were younger, but as we got older he told us more and more details of the story. He would avoid details of the dogs and the arm, but the way he described that thing was always the same. It was burned into my imagination as a kid and would sometimes give me nightmares. Now that I'm older, I'm not afraid of the story. It's just one of the saddest and most disturbing family stories I've ever heard. I've never really believed in the paranormal or the supernatural, but every time my uncle tells me this story and describes the disgusting, sadistic black eyes of this thing, I believe him.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.